Chapter 4. As usual, Lavender was right. His prescience was astounding. We were not finished with breakfast in the morning when the telephone bell rang, and at the other end of the connection was Miss Miner. Lavender listened to her message. Quite expected it, Miss Miner. In fact, I have waiting for your call. Naturally, there is no further occasion for my services. Was it a phone call, may I ask, or a wire? He listened again. I understand. Very well, Miss Miner. And if ever again I can be of service to you, remember that I shall be glad to serve. Goodbye. The last words fell like clods upon my heart. Lavender was smiling oddly as he turned away. Finis coronat opus, said he. That means, Gilly, the end crowns the work. We are politely, courteously, but definitely and conclusively fired, as it were. Miss Miner has heard from her father, a wire early this morning saying merely that he was well and would be home soon. How did you know she would hear from him? I asked morosely. I knew that she was bound to. You see, he found out that I was on his trail and was afraid that I would make his disappearance look like something it was never intended to be. When he went away, he had no idea of the publicity that would follow his action, and he had no thought that his daughter would return and start a hunt for him. He managed it all rather badly, as a matter of fact. Do you suppose he returned to the club and they told him there that we were looking for him? I don't believe he's been near the club. I think Miss Kane told him. Miss Kane? I shouted. What has Miss Kane to do with this case? A great deal, said Lavender, since she was undoubtedly at the bottom of Miner's disappearance as she was at the bottom of the Vandernock Merritt disappearance. You remember I told you that I have contrived to bring Miner's name into my conversation with her yesterday? I did it purposely so she would tell him. I thought it would inform him of his daughter's return and that this action would follow. Good Lord, I groaned. What is the secret of it all, Lavender? Why did he go away? Why did Merritt masquerade as Vandernock or Vandernock as Merritt? And what has Miss Kane to do with all of them? I'll tell you how it works out, Gilly, as nearly as I can. And I must tell you about my investigations of last night. They have a bearing on your questions. I went to Elmhurst as I explained. In fact, I went twice, once after leaving Miss Kane in the afternoon and once after the evening performance. On the latter occasion, I followed Miss Kane. In the afternoon, I merely made enquiries in the neighborhood. Miss Kane has lived there for about 3 months. I was informed by the rental agency with an invalid brother and a maid. At first, I naturally thought that the invalid brother was the man I wanted. But the 3 months knocked that idea in the head of Miner has been living at home and has been at his club until a week ago, while the invalid brother lives with Miss Kane and doesn't go out any place. Then he's Vandernock, I said. Well, demurred Lavender, I suppose it's conceivable, but I don't agree, Gilly. Really, the same objection applies to Vandernock. No, in my theory of this amusing case, he can't be Vandernock either. I may as well tell you at once that I believe not only that Vandernock was Merritt, but that Miner was both of them. I sat up very straight in my chair and stared at him for a moment in silence. I am not crazy, he replied to my glance. I don't think I am, Gilly. I'm admitting that the invalid brother may be Vandernock and that Miner may be someplace else. and even admitting that the invalid brother may be just himself, an honest to goodness invalid brother of Miss Kane. But I don't think so. Everything points to the truth of my idea that Merritt, Vandernock, and Miner are one and the same individual playing a game, and Miner isn't anxious that his daughter shall discover what that game is, at least not until it is played out. That's why he wired Miss Shirley and why we were called off. We were getting too warm, as the boys say. Of course, Miss Minor had no idea that in releasing us, she was playing her father's game. He shook his head. What puzzles me, however, is that invalid brother. If he isn't Minor and isn't Vandernock to accept your idea for a moment, who is he? Unless he is just himself. I think he's Mrs. Jamieson, I said with a grin. Lavender laughed. No, he replied. She at least has nothing to do with this case. She just happens to have disappeared on the same day. Well, to continue, having learned nothing in particular yesterday afternoon, I followed Miss Kane home last night. I wanted to see whom, if anybody, she would meet at her home. She met nobody. There were lights in the place for some time, chiefly upstairs. But after she had closed the door, I didn't have a second glimpse of Miss Kane, not a shadow on the blind. Finally, darkness fell over the house and I came home. I'm very much afraid indeed that the invalid brother is not a myth, that he actually exists, if for no other reason than to complicate this case. And you have no idea why Minor is doing all this. Oh, yes, a sort of an idea, Gilly, but it isn't complete. I don't understand why Miss Shirley has not known all about it from the beginning. There's nothing heinous in it that I can see. And now I suppose we shall never know, I suggested. I think we will, said Lavender. I think that Miner himself will look us up to see how much we know and to tell us the rest so that we will keep our mouths shut. However, it came about rather differently, for we had talked barely an hour when again a telephone bell rang and again it was Miss Shirley Minor who called. Lavender's expression was one of comical relief as he listened to what she had to say. Quite right, he said. And a minute later, yes, I think I can. Can you join us? Then please do. Come at once. There was a gleam in his eye when he had hung up the receiver. Off again, on again, he chuckled. It gets better, Gilly. Miss Minor distrusts her wire. She doesn't believe her father sent it, and she is more alarmed than ever. It seems that the telegram was signed father instead of dad, and I think the young lady's point is well taken. If he always signed himself dad, he should have done so this time. It is such slips that betray criminals. Now I know what happened. Minor didn't send the wire, and Miss Kane did, probably unknown to Minor. Well, it should be over shortly. Miss Minor asked me if I knew where her father was. She had an idea that I did because I had told her that she would hear from him. I took a chance and said yes. She's on her way here now. I looked startled. Can you make good on that, Jimmy? I cautiously asked. Well, I can at least bluff Miss Kane, he replied. And this is what I propose to do. We'll drive out with Miss Shirley herself and surprise the actress lady at her tardy breakfast. I think something interesting will develop. It will be dramatic, and you had better possess your soul in patience till we get there. I won't spoil it for you. He flung himself into a chair and gave himself over to some deep thinking. Please don't talk for few minutes, Gilly, he cautioned me. It was exactly 20 minutes before he sprang to his feet, in which time he had smoked a great many cigarettes. A new gleam was in his eye, and without a word he strode to the telephone. From his pocket he produced a list of numbers, then lifted the receiver. In a moment or two he was talking apparently to a shopkeeper in Elmhurst. "You remember my asking you yesterday about Miss Kane and her brother?" he queried. "I forgot one thing. Do you often see Mr. Kane, the brother, in the streets?" He listened eagerly to the reply. "Thank you. That's all." He swung on me. "Gilly, what do you think the fellow said?" "He said, 'No, nor anybody else. He don't go out. Nobody ever sees him.'" "Well, that's natural enough," I started to reply. But Lavender was calling another number and asking the same question. Again he turned to me. "That was a neighbor," he crowed. "She said I only saw him once, and that was about a week ago. It was getting along toward dark, and I didn't see him very clear. I guess he's pretty sick." Excuse her grammar, Gilly, but digest her remarks. "Don't they tell you anything? What an ass I was not to have guessed before." "I confess," I began. "Don't," he laughed. "I have been as big an idiot as you have. Bless our poor innocent hearts. Why, it means only one thing. This invalid is never seen and never has been seen except once by his neighbor, and then at night, for the very good reason that he never existed. Until a week ago, when his neighbor saw him going in, he had never been there. For 3 months, he had been an invention of Miss Kane's to take care of emergencies. She knew that sometime Minor would come, and that when he did, he might be seen. She had to provide for all that. I'll bet she moved in at night. She started the fiction somehow or other right after she moved in, so that if ever Minor came and was seen at a window, his presence would be accounted for. So that if Minor even had to leave in daylight, he could do it without talk. A week ago he came, and for the first time the invalid brother was seen, and whoever saw him thought he was the invalid brother, and he is there now too, keeping out of sight. The place isn't thickly populated, the houses are pretty far apart, and not many people would be inclined to ask questions. What gossip there has been about the invalid brother has come from the shops, where I have no doubt Miss Kane herself began it. The shopkeepers talked as they always do to any who will listen, and those of their customers who were interested remembered. "Very clever," I commented. Lavender agreed heartily, except that he was thinking of Miss Kane's scheme and I was thinking of his solution of the problem. So it came about that an hour and a half after our conversation, Lavender and I and Miss Shirley Minor rang a doorbell out in Elmhurst, or at any rate, one of us did, and directed a startled maid to take our cards to Miss Kane. At the same time, Lavender quietly inserted his foot in the door opening. The maid had no alternative. She let us into the sitting room. And then a curious thing happened. Miss Minor's eyes fell upon a photograph on the mantel, and a puzzled look spread over her face. Following her glance, I saw what must have been a portrait of Miss Kane taken some years before, and I too was startled, for it might have been a portrait of Shirley Minor herself. Lavender was watching us. He smiled very kindly at the girl. "Yes," he said, "it is a little older than Miss Minor, of course, but on the whole a very good portrait, don't you think?" Shirley Minor turned to him swiftly. "You are going to tell me something very strange," she said. "Tell me at once. Who is that woman?" "I believe her to be your mother," answered Lavender quietly. The girl's hand shook and her face twitched. My mother, she stammered, is dead. I knew her. She died about 3 years ago, Mr. Lavender. God knows I have no desire to cause you distress, replied my friend. But I firmly believe the original of that portrait to be Miss Sydney Kane, your mother. Then the curtains were swept aside, and a tall, handsome woman was in the room. Her entrance was theatrical. Her face was the face of Shirley Minor, but older and sadder. Yes, she said in a harsh, strained voice. He is right. I am Miss Sydney Kane, dear, and your mother. After this, there is nothing to be concealed. Surely there never has been, suggested Lavender. Cyril thought so too, she replied defiantly. No doubt was Lavender's reply. It is too bad. Oh, tell me, cried Shirley Minor. Tell me before I scream. The older woman crossed the room and laid a hand on her daughter's head. The gesture was timid and caressing. I hope you will love me, she said simply. Listen, dear, your father and I were divorced when you were a tiny baby. There had been trouble. His family objected to his marrying an actress. Shortly afterward, he married again. She was a charming woman and she treated you as her own daughter and loved you. Your father tried to forget, and as part of the effort, he allowed you always to believe that his wife was your mother. I think they were happy. I hope they were. You grew up, the years passed, and at length Mrs. Minor died, as you know. While she lived, your father was content. After her death, he had you, and your face was a constant reminder of me. He felt that he had treated me badly, and he set about finding me. He did find me, and we loved each other again. We have been married now for more than a year, but until recently, we had not been together except for a few days at a time. I kept my position on the stage, and your father, who as a young man had wanted to be an actor, decided to join me there, for in that way he could often be with me. He actually became popular as a comedian to the great surprise of us both. She smiled almost brightly for a moment, then her face saddened again. But he had to keep it all very quiet, or he thought he did. He hated publicity and he didn't want the old story raked up. You had been happy with your second mother, and he didn't want to take that from you. So he became two other men. On the stage, he was Charles Merritt, but he never left this city. He played only here in Chicago, and he loved his work so much that he didn't care to leave it. When his part was over, he would quietly dress for the street, leave the theater, and become, for a time, Peter Vandenock. But Peter Vandenock was only a myth. He used the office as a place to hide himself while he became again Cyril Minor. I knew that someday he would break under the strain of the situation. I could see it coming, and I made a home ready for him to go to when the time came. A week ago, he became ill. Don't be alarmed, he is better now. Someone had to care for him, and I had the best right. I brought him to my home here, but at the same time, of course, both Peter Vandenock and Charles Merritt also disappeared. I couldn't even explain Charles Merritt's disappearance without betraying Cyril, and so I did nothing. Lavender nodded and took up the tale. And of course, you had no idea that Shirley would come home and miss her father, nor that this old idiot of a landlord would start a search for Vandenock. It was all unfortunate in a way, and yet it has ended very happily. But Mr. Miner would have done better to have trusted Shirley entirely from the beginning. As if I would have cared, cried Miss Miner, springing to her feet. Where is he? The look in her mother's eyes stopped her. She retraced her steps and, pulling down the older head to her own, kissed the sorrowful eyes. I'm sure I shall love you, she said, but it is still so strange and new, and of course, Dad. Of course, said Miss Sydney King, and with a lift of her finger to us, she led the way upstairs. The end.